For years, gospel music's biggest name and one of the most outspoken preachers in America have been walking two completely different roads. But what if I told you those roads just collided? At 55, Kirk Franklin, the man who changed gospel forever, finally speaks out about the one pastor who's been calling him out for years, Gino Jennings. And this time, Kirk isn't holding back. From hidden resentment to unspoken truths, what he reveals about Gino will leave even the church speechless. For years, Kirk Franklin has been seen as the heartbeat of modern gospel, the man who brought hip-hop, soul, and real emotion into the church world. But behind that smooth smile and platinum records lies a story few have ever heard. Because when you strip away the fame, the choirs, and the glory, there's a deep tension that's been building between Kirk Franklin and one of the most polarizing voices in the pulpit, Pastor Gino Jennings. Now, Kirk Franklin has always been known for keeping his cool. He's a man of grace, a man of heart. But recently, something shifted. At 55, he's no longer biting his tongue. In a moment that shocked fans and rattled church circles, Kirk revealed the 5 things he simply can't stand about Gino Jennings. And trust me, these aren't small disagreements. We're talking about decades of difference in belief, character, and calling. In this video, we're diving deep into the truth behind Kirk Franklin's explosive revelation, the hidden history between the two, the words that sparked this quiet feud, and how it all led to this moment. You're about to see sides of both men that the public has never seen before, the perfectionist artist versus the unapologetic preacher, two forces that define Black faith culture but see the gospel in completely different ways. And as we unpack each of the 5 things Kirk Franklin revealed, you'll begin to understand why he said what he said and why this might just be the moment that changes the way we look at both of them forever. Because by the end of this, you won't just know what Kirk hates about Gino Jennings, you'll know why it cuts so deep. But before we get into the list, you need to understand where this tension started and how 2 men of God ended up standing on opposite sides of the same stage. To understand why Kirk Franklin finally opened up about Gino Jennings, you have to go back to the roots, to the moment when gospel music itself began to change. In the early 1990 seconds, gospel was at a crossroads. The sound was sacred but struggling to stay relevant to a new generation that was turning to R&B, hip-hop, and pop. And then came Kirk Franklin, a young, fiery, streetwise musician from Fort Worth, Texas, who wasn't afraid to mix church with culture. His debut with The Family didn't just sell millions, it redefined what gospel could be. For the first time, young people were bumping gospel in their cars, not just on Sunday mornings. But while millions celebrated this bold new wave, not everyone was clapping. In another corner of the church world stood Gino Jennings, a man whose preaching style was as raw as it was unapologetic. To his followers, he was the real deal, a preacher who refused to water down holiness for popularity. Gino preached old-school fire. No compromise, no entertainment, no worldly influence in the house of God. And that's where the silent clash began. While Kirk was performing on stages packed with lights, cameras, and celebrity guests, Gino Jennings was in the pulpit warning about what he called the modern gospel movement, accusing it of being too commercial, too worldly, and too distracted by fame. Though Gino never called out Kirk Franklin by name at first, his sermons made it clear who he was talking about. And those who followed both men could feel the tension growing. Over the years, the divide only got wider. Kirk Franklin became the face of inspirational gospel music, collaborating with stars like Kanye West, Chance the Rapper, and even secular artists to reach souls beyond the church walls. But Gino Jennings doubled down, preaching against everything he saw as compromise: flashy preachers, entertainment-driven churches, and gospel artists who sold out for fame. It was like watching 2 sides of the same coin, one focused on grace and connection, the other on discipline and separation. For years, Kirk stayed silent. He didn't respond publicly, even when clips of Gino's sermons went viral online, often mocking or condemning the very culture that Kirk helped create. Fans wondered, when is Kirk going to say something? But the truth is, he was waiting. He wanted to speak not out of anger, but out of experience. And now, at 55, after decades of leading choirs, facing criticism, and enduring personal trials, Kirk finally felt ready to say what had been sitting in his heart all along. Because According to those close to him, this wasn't about revenge, it was about release. That brings us to the first of the 5 things Kirk Franklin says he hates about Gino Jennings. And trust me, it hits hard. When Kirk Franklin finally spoke about Gino Jennings, the first thing he mentioned wasn't Gino's sermons, his followers, or even his message, it was his tone. Kirk said he had grown tired of the spirit of judgment that seemed to follow Gino's preaching wherever it went. Now, for anyone who has ever listened to Gino Jennings, you know exactly what that means. His sermons are raw, unfiltered, and often laced with confrontation. He calls out everyone, pastors, musicians, and even entire denominations, accusing them of hypocrisy, sin, and false teaching. To some, it's refreshing. To others, it's exhausting. And to Kirk Franklin, it became personal. Kirk believes that ministry should lead with love, not condemnation. For him, the church isn't supposed to be a courtroom. It's supposed to be a hospital. He spent his entire career trying to reach people who feel unworthy, broken, or judged by religion. When he hears someone like Gino Jennings tearing people down publicly, it feels like an attack on everything he stands for. In one of his candid interviews, Kirk explained that the church's greatest failure isn't sin, it's pride. He said, "We've become so busy judging people that we forget we're broken too." And that statement, according to insiders, was directed right at Gino's style of preaching. Kirk's issue wasn't that Gino believed in holiness, it's that he weaponized it. He turned what should have been a message of redemption into one of rejection. While Kirk was trying to pull people closer to God through music, Gino's harsh words were pushing some away. Over the years, Kirk had quietly received messages from fans and believers who told him, "I left the church because of people like Gino Jennings." That broke him. Because Kirk never wanted the gospel to feel like a burden or a weapon, he wanted it to feel like hope. Behind the scenes, Kirk had tried to take the high road. He refused to respond publicly for years, telling his team, "I'm not going to fight another man of God in front of the world." But deep down, the words stung. Gino's sermons often called out gospel musicians who shake their hips like the world, or who seek applause instead of anointing. Those barbs, thinly veiled, were aimed straight at Kirk Franklin. And while Kirk never expected everyone to agree with his style, he hated how Gino seemed to enjoy dividing the faith community instead of uniting it. He once told a close friend, "When you spend your whole ministry attacking other believers, who's left to heal the broken ones?" To Kirk, that spirit of judgment, that joy in tearing others down was toxic. It poisoned what he believed the gospel stood for. He said, "It hurt to watch someone use God's name to promote exclusion instead of inclusion, especially in a world already divided by color, class, and culture." And perhaps that's what made this first thing sting the most. It wasn't just theological disagreement, it was emotional. It was personal. Because for Kirk Franklin, ministry was never about proving who's right. It was about reminding people they're loved, even when they're wrong. But if you think that's the only thing that made Kirk speak up, you're mistaken. Because the next thing he revealed hits even deeper, something that goes beyond judgment, straight into the heart of what Kirk believes is the real danger in Gino Jennings' message. And when you hear what it is, you'll understand why Kirk said he had to speak now before it was too late. The second thing Kirk Franklin revealed about Gino Jennings cuts even deeper than judgment. It's about influence, and how that influence can be misused. For Kirk, this isn't just a theological concern, it's personal. He has spent decades building a platform to uplift, inspire, and heal, and he sees the platform as a sacred responsibility. To him, every microphone, every stage, every song, every sermon carries power, the power to shape hearts and minds. Gino Jennings, according to Kirk, wields his platform like a weapon rather than a bridge. Where Kirk sees opportunity to unite, Gino sees an opportunity to divide. Kirk pointed out that Jennings often targets other pastors, gospel artists, and even congregants in ways that publicly shame them. This isn't just criticism, it's a magnified form of attack, amplified by an audience that hangs on every word. Consider this. Kirk Franklin has millions of followers who look up to him for guidance, inspiration, and hope. Every word he speaks can lift someone out of despair or guide them toward faith. Gino Jennings, with his fiery sermons and uncompromising stance, also commands a devoted audience. But according to Kirk, too often that influence sows fear, guilt, and division rather than encouragement. Kirk explained it this way in a private conversation that leaked to insiders. Platforms are given to leaders not to elevate themselves, but to lift others. When you use it to tear down instead of build up, you're hurting the very people you say you're trying to save. The tension between them became personal when Kirk realized that some of Gino's public critiques were thinly veiled attacks on his ministry and message. He didn't just see differences in style, he saw his work being undermined in the public eye. Songs that Kirk poured his heart into, designed to bring joy and healing, were being framed as worldly entertainment or misguided attempts at holiness. What frustrated Kirk the most wasn't just the words themselves, it was the ripple effect. Fans, young believers, and even older members of the church community were being influenced by fear rather than faith, by criticism rather than conviction, and Kirk felt a responsibility to respond, not in anger, but in truth. He didn't go looking for conflict, but after years of observing this, he realized that silence could be interpreted as agreement. And in a world where misinformation spreads faster than reconciliation, Kirk knew he had to clarify his position not to win a fight, but to protect the integrity of the gospel and the hearts of his audience. Interestingly, insiders say this realization didn't happen overnight. Kirk spent years reflecting, praying, and weighing whether speaking out publicly would do more good than harm. But finally, he reached a point where holding back felt like a disservice to the faith he's dedicated his life to. And what's even more revealing is how this misuse of influence connects directly to the next thing Kirk revealed, something far more personal and deeply emotional. This next point isn't about theology or preaching style, it's about character and how actions behind the scenes can create tension that the public rarely sees. This is where things get truly eye-opening. The third thing Kirk Franklin revealed about Gino Jennings is the most personal. It's about character and integrity. This is where Kirk's grievances move beyond preaching styles or theological disagreements and hit the core of who he believes a leader should be. Kirk Franklin has always been transparent about his life, the struggles, the triumphs, and the mistakes. He's openly shared battles with depression, failed relationships, and the pressures of ministry. For him, leadership is not just about teaching scripture, it's about living it authentically, being accountable, and demonstrating humility even when the world watches. According to Kirk, Gino Jennings often presents himself as a perfect standard of holiness, a model preacher who never stumbles or compromises. On the surface, this appeals to his followers, who crave certainty in a confusing world. But Kirk believes that this perception of flawlessness is misleading and can foster a culture of fear rather than faith. In his revelation, Kirk pointed out that integrity isn't just about avoiding sin, it's about how you treat people, how you handle criticism, and how you lead in private. He claimed that while Gino Jennings preaches uncompromising messages in the pulpit, behind the scenes, there are moments where the harshness, rigidity, and lack of empathy create tension within his own ministry and among those who serve him. Kirk recalled hearing stories from insiders and former church members' accounts of people feeling excluded, silenced, or judged harshly for mistakes that would have been met with grace elsewhere. For Kirk, witnessing this from afar was frustrating because it contradicted the gospel's call to restoration. "I've spent my life trying to bring people closer to God," Kirk explained. "And it hurts when someone in the same field uses the same stage to push people away." He said that seeing a peer elevate themselves above their followers, cloaked in an image of moral superiority, made it difficult to respect the approach, even if he respected the calling. This isn't about ego or rivalry. Kirk's concern is rooted in principle. Leaders in ministry carry a responsibility not just for what they teach, but for the culture they create. And when that culture becomes punitive or fear-based, it undermines the very purpose of faith, which, according to Kirk, is to heal, not hurt. It's also worth noting that this clash of character doesn't just affect the two men personally, it affects the wider gospel community. Fans, aspiring artists, and young ministers often watch these dynamics closely, forming opinions and expectations about how faith leaders should behave. Kirk's critique is a warning. Leadership isn't about perfection in public, it's about authenticity in all aspects of life. And as we move to the next revelation, you'll see that Kirk's frustrations with Gino Jennings aren't just philosophical or spiritual, they're deeply emotional, touching on the very soul of ministry and influence, and the way it impacts lives in real time. One of the most significant points Kirk Franklin raised is how Gino Jennings divides the faith community. Kirk has always believed in building bridges, connecting people across denominations, cultures, and backgrounds. He's collaborated with a diverse array of artists, reaching audiences that many traditional churches could not. His message is simple: faith should unite, not divide. Gino Jennings, in contrast, often frames his sermons around us versus them. Kirk explained that this creates a culture where followers view anyone outside Jennings' exact approach as inferior, misguided, or even dangerous. It's subtle at first, a joke here, a critique there, but over time, it fosters division, pitting church against church, artist against artist, and sometimes even believer against believer. Kirk's frustration isn't hypothetical. He's seen talented musicians, dedicated pastors, and passionate churchgoers walk away from their calling because they felt judged or excluded. In interviews, he's emphasized that the gospel's true power is in unity, compassion, and community, not condemnation. The fourth thing, Kirk said, is the way this division spreads like a virus. When you isolate people for the sake of purity, you're creating walls instead of doors. He believes that this type of approach does more harm than good, leaving communities fractured and hearts hardened rather than healed. It's a delicate point because Kirk acknowledges that discipline, truth, and accountability are vital, but there's a difference between guiding with love and controlling with fear. And according to Kirk, that's exactly where Gino Jennings crosses the line.